Individuals with autism have more trouble completing tasks of daily living, lower sense of self-direction, had fewer planned activities and social engagements, which came out of a longitudinal study that was just published last year. Good morning. This is as much Swedish as I know. So forgive me for being a monolingual American. But I bring you greetings from the United States. It's my honor to be here at this conference and to be a visiting professor at Stockholm University. So I want to introduce myself following Ari's nice introduction. I'm a senior research scientist at the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute, a large research institute at University of North Carolina, visiting professor here at Stockholm University. My background is as a special education teacher, program coordinator for programs for children and youth with autism spectrum disorders, or which I'll just call autism in this conference, and a university professor. My theoretical orientation is applied behavior analysis, sort of the current version of applied behavior analysis, although I feel like I operate from more of an technical eclectic perspective. And a tradition in the U.S. is that we always disclose if we have royalties or other financial interests. So unfortunately, I have no royalties coming in. The work that we do is we try to put up for people to use for no cost. So you'll hear today about resources from our website that you can pull down as PDFs and videos. Our work is funded by the Office of Special Education Programs, and I would just want to acknowledge the large number of people over the last 10 years that have 10 years plus that have worked with us on our projects. So today I'm going to be speaking about autism spectrum disorders in the U.S. That's the terminology that's used now through the American Psychiatric Association's classification manual. The OCD-10 autistic disorder is identified, as well as Asperger's and other related disorders. But the common feature of those characteristics of autism is challenges in developing social communication and rigid repetitive behavior. Those are the two primary characteristics. The other characteristic of autism is the range of support that's needed, the range of abilities that are represented with that autism spectrum, going from individuals with superior to average intellect and who go to college or engage in work, to other children and youth and adults who may not speak or who may be nonverbal. So it's a large range. Mostly boys. Prevalence is in the U.S. The prevalence is 1 in 68, and there are associated difficulties, challenges experienced by individuals with autism that I'll talk about in just a few minutes. So my talk today, the title for my talk today came from the work that we have done with adolescents and young adults. So when we think about life outcomes, I want to show some interviews that we have done, and this is by courtesy of the TEACH program at North Carolina. So they interviewed young adults, and older adults too, about their goals for their lives.
Oh, there are a lot of things I love to do. I like to draw, sing, play the piano.
My hopes for my future are be a good digital artist.
There are a lot of things I want to do in the future. I'd like to meet a girl again. I was married at one point, but that marriage didn't last like only a year or two.
My biggest hope is that I'll finally be employed in a field that I actually enjoy.
I'll get a relationship eventually. Maybe enroll myself in veterinary school so I can become a vet tech. Because I love working with animals.
Mostly have like a 2-story house with a basement. That's mostly it so far.
And I could have my own home, and that I'd have all the skills I need and not have to rely on anyone else anymore but myself.
My hopes for the future are a little more dynamic for me at this point.
My hopes that I will be employed.
I'm just a normal girl, just looking toward a world to learn from.
I definitely hope to have my own kids, get married one day.
Have a wife, a kid, probably, I don't know. Because like kids are like a huge responsibility, like, do I have to take care of this thing, or, okay, I gotta take care of this thing.
It's great to be different.
So these individuals express a lot of the hopes that we have for our lives too. You'll hear today about a Center on Autism Spectrum Disorders for Adolescents. We work in high schools or secondary schools, grades 9 through 12 and plus after that for transition programs. But so when our center began, it's a research and development center. When we began, we brought our advisory board together, experts from across the U.S. And some individuals with autism, adults with autism, to advise us about how to develop a program, a high school program for students with autism. And we had them write down what they hoped. At the very first year of the 5-year center, we asked them what they hoped we would achieve by this center. But we didn't keep track of who put these sticky notes on the board as they left at the final day of our advisory board meeting. But one of the sticky notes said, for your subjects, we would never call individuals that work that are in our study subjects, but they said, for your subjects, when they graduate, we hope that they have something to do, somewhere to be, and someone to love. Good luck. So that has pushed us, that has kind of inspired us a bit, over the last 5 years in the program that we do and the work that we've done in high schools. We now are following those young adults, those adolescents, as they leave high school and go into the community and to work. We wanted to identify what we think are important young adult outcomes. It's what we call them, and it classified them into 3 different areas. One is health. A second is work or post-secondary education. And a third is community integration. So when we don't have data on those outcomes yet because we're just starting into that phase of our work. But when we look at what the literature, what the research tells us about young adult outcomes for students, individuals who leave school, we find that the outcomes are not very positive. There are challenges for, so in terms of health, Vice in 2018 just recently published an article about health outcomes for young adults. The way to interpret these numbers, let's see if I can, these numbers here, these are called odds ratios. So a number 1 right here would mean that this condition has about the same odds as happening in adults with autism and adults who are typically developing or who do not have autism, which was called a non-DD population. So for health outcomes in this study, asthma happened about as much for young adults with autism and without autism. What we find, though, are differences in other health outcomes where Hypertension may happen, it appears to be happening twice as much. Diabetes, almost 3 times as much. So those health outcomes are kind of coming to the surface. But the differences are even greater for mental health outcomes. So for psychiatric diagnoses, about 3 times as often occurs for individuals with autism as so these are diagnoses in addition to autism. Pediatric visits 12 times as much. Visits to neurologists, emergency rooms, psychiatric hospitals. So the health outcomes, physical, but especially mental health outcomes, are a concern, are a challenge for many people with autism. And we know from our high school students, depression and social anxiety is one of the challenges that happens for many, or for a number of the students in high school. Employment outcomes, that is, as students leave school, what we find that 1/3 of young adults with autism are underemployed, and those who are employed, they often fail to maintain their employment across time. Julie Taylor from Vanderbilt identified that in her review, in her research. So 50% did not participate in employment after 2 years from graduating from high school, Paul Shattuck's work, and also 34% attended college. One could look and say 34% attending college is good. 66% not attending college is a concern. Community outcomes, community integration. Individuals with autism are more likely to live at home after high school and less likely to live independently in comparison to individuals with other disabilities. Which may or may not be a bad thing. Some families welcome their children as adults living at home. Others search for or seek or hope for independence for their children. Relative to other students with disabilities who had IEPs, individuals with autism have more trouble completing tasks of daily living, lower sense of self-direction, had fewer planned activities and social engagement, which came out of a longitudinal study that was just published last year. So challenges exist. In designing programs, we want to think, what can we do about these outcomes? One of my colleagues is a psychologist, once said that he thought the school system was the best hope that we may have for students with autism. The reasons, he thought, and this is in the U.S., so you have to take all of this with a grain of salt, as we say in the U.S., because it's a very U.S.-centric talk. But he felt like children and youth with autism spend a good part of their day in school, and of those, there are a substantial number of hours that they are in school. Professional staff are trained or could be trained to deliver effective interventions. And there are peers, typically developing peers, that can become a part of the instructional social experience that happen in schools. So in the US and in Sweden too, the goal of schools is to prepare our citizens for adulthood, our adolescent citizens for adulthood. And that's no less true for students with autism as it is for all students who are in secondary school or high schools. So let's think about it. Again, these are from US figures. The students with autism, children with autism can enter the school system, public school system, at 3 years of age, and they can stay in a public school system until 22 years of age, and in some cases up to 26. So that's 19 years. There are 180 days in school. There's 6 hours per day. So that's 20,000 hours that are potentially learning opportunities for children without autism. Or or 1.2 million minutes. There's a lot of opportunity there. Now, of course, students are not engaged in learning all that amount of time. There's transitions, there's school assemblies, but it provides a big opportunity for us to make a difference. If we just look at the typical school age year from age 6 to age 18, that's still almost 780,000 minutes. So, excuse me, there are lots of potential opportunities. But what stands in the way for adolescents, teenagers with autism in high schools? We describe that situation as a perfect storm of complexity. So I don't know if Swedish high schools are like American high schools. You all are very organized, so I'm sure this doesn't happen in Sweden. But there are schedules that change daily. We have a concept called a block schedule, which, well, I won't go into this one. The scheduling is a big issue, along with staff turnover. So there are a number of features of high schools that are a challenge, but there are some really big strengths that happen in high schools too. Adolescents alone, do any of you have adolescent children? Probably. So you know that there are, some of you may know that for some children, adolescence itself is a challenge. And if you combine that with autism, it creates a situation, a complex situation that's not hopeless, but it's one that one has to understand both the nuances and the needs of students with autism in those situations. So the Center for Secondary Education for Students with Autism is funded by our Institute for Education Science. It was a 5-year institute where we had 2 years to develop a comprehensive treatment model for students with autism, one that would work in high schools, that would be run by high school personnel, teachers. And then in the last 3 years of our 5 years, we conducted a research study, a randomized clinical trial, where in 30 high schools in the U.S., in North Carolina, in Wisconsin, and in California, we implemented that comprehensive treatment model. So what I'm going to talk about today are the parts or the features of that model that we implemented. The research, we're right at the end of our study, so we're analyzing our research data. So I'm not going to present research today. But we call it CSA, Center for Secondary Education for Students with Autism. And you can easily access our website by just putting in CSA and autism into Google, and it should come right up. But if it doesn't, then the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute would be the location to find it. When we first took on this task of developing a comprehensive treatment model, we talked to our funders about how the challenges and the needs of students with autism, and also the strengths of students with autism, vary greatly in high school. So as I mentioned, there's students that may be nonverbal and have intellectual disability, behavior challenges, and there are students who are academic stars in their program. One student, I'll talk about some of the students later, but who may be leaders in some aspects of the program, but still has faced social challenges. So for us, it created a complicated, or again, a complex model that needed to match the complexity that happens in high school programs. We knew that the model would have to have a number of parts because of that range of abilities and challenges. Those parts you can see in this diagram. So we have 4 components or 4 features of the program that a high school will implement or use across a 2-year period. It's the needs are great in high schools, and in a complex model like this, we wouldn't expect a high school to do all of these things in 1 year. So we worked with high schools for 2 years to implement these different features. But there's one feature that I'll talk about that focuses on academics, a second on independence and behavior, a third on social, and a fourth on transition in families. We begin by working on the quality of the whole high school program. So we conduct an assessment that's called the APERS, and develop an action plan for improving the general underlying quality. And I'm not going to talk very much about that today because that could take another hour to talk about. We work in teams, so the very first part of the work that we do is organizing a team, which we call the A-team, or the autism team, that's usually made up of 1 or 2 special education teachers, general education teacher like a high school math teacher or a PE coach, physical education coach, a member of the administration, so the principal or assistant principal, usually a speech pathologist, maybe school psychologist. So the team in a high school may consist of 6 or 7 or more professionals that work in that high school. And we provide professional development through that team to share with them the materials that we developed and to support their use of those materials for individuals with autism who are in their school. So the first area is academics. So as I mentioned, the range of abilities for students with autism are quite wide. And so we built on the work of 2 leaders in the field in special education in the U.S. Diane Browder has developed a system for teaching literacy skills to individuals with, or to students with intellectual disability. And we adapted some of her work to be used with students with autism who had intellectual disability. Sharon Vaughn at the University of Texas is a leader in designing literacy programs for adolescents with learning disabilities. And again, we adapted some of her work in this academic area. So the focus is on comprehension. That seems to be a challenge, and it doesn't seem to be. That is a challenge for many students with autism spectrum disorders as they are brought into the literacy world. Not only reading, but understanding what they're reading is critically important. And I mentioned the 2 different types of approaches that we use. The alternative achievement literacy, ALL, is the approach designed for adolescents with autism and with intellectual disability. So it makes substantial use of icons or small pictures to convey the meaning and pairing it with words that are in the literacy text. It involves sort of adapting books so that they are presented in a form that individuals with intellectual disabilities and autism can understand. And again, I just have a little time to highlight what we do, and I'll refer you to our website for more information. The ALL is used to teach or used in literacy, storybook reading, for example, but it's also used in other content areas like science and math. Those skills are also taught to individuals with intellectual disabilities. So an example of how a text is broken down in this chapter, on Friday I meet Karen, just the sentence in Friday I meet Karen with a calendar after school so she can draw my hands. When she's done, she showed me her drawing. And there are prompts to lead students through those passages. So I was in a high school in Charlotte, North Carolina, when we first began our project, and went to the ALL class that was happening in that high school, and they were reading Macbeth, and I thought, oh my God! So these are individuals with intellectual disabilities, high school students. Some students were able to access the actual text, and other students had augmentative communication devices where they would be able to signal the answer to a comprehension question that may happen. So when I walked into the classroom, the students were wearing crowns, and they had cloaks, and they had swords, and they had shields, and they were actually going through the script from an adapted script from Macbeth, which I was quite impressed. I think the important part of that ALL is that it can be used across content areas and for adapting literacy content. The collaborative strategic reading approach is designed for high school students who have a reading ability of third grade and above. But those high school students are in content or literacy heavy content courses like social studies and science. In English literature. So this adaptation of Sharon Vaughn's work, the collaborative strategic reading, again focuses on breaking down the text with a teacher introduction, what to do before reading starts, what happens during reading, look for words or sentences that don't make sense, talk about them with a peer, read answers about the topic, and then what to do after reading. It's a peer-mediated approach, so there are peers in the high school class that are involved in the instruction and provide support. Independence and behavior is another feature of the work that we do. Individuals with autism often become prompt dependent. One issue is being able to independently operate on their own, and the feature of the program that's based on independence and behavior called PRISM, so promoting responsibility, independence, and self-management. In order to assess independence and behavior, we developed a checklist, which we call the Secondary School Success Checklist, which allows the teacher and the student and the parents to identify those skills that are important for independence in high school. So, and if you go if you go to our website, you can actually pull the PDF of that checklist off of our website. The checklist is the first step in designing an independence program. So identifying the goal, examining the evidence-based practice associated with that goal. And those evidence-based practices come out of the work that we have done to identify interventions that have an evidence base. So they serve as the basis for instruction. And then monitoring success, and then changing the goal if necessary. So the kinds of things that might be part of an intervention is I'll interpret this for you, because you probably, if you're on the top row, you won't be able to read it, or I'll at least read it for you. So this is a short social story, a social narrative, and it's about what I do if my ride doesn't show up at school. And this evidently for the student was an issue, because not being picked up at school is stressful for any student, but for students with autism, it may lead to, for some students, may lead to a meltdown, or they just don't know what to know. But the instructions are, I go to the office and I say to the receptionist that my ride is not here. I need to call my mom. That kind of problem solving for this particular student didn't happen, and was identified as a priority skill that they needed to learn to survive in their environment. So we have visual supports that happen in the environment, and make use of, in some cases, make use of technology. I'll go through that one. In some places, make use of technology. For this student, for example, we have a class called Academic Strategies, which is a time of the day that students may work on some academic content. This student would meet in an academic strategy class, use visual supports to understand the concepts that were being provided, and maybe prompting and reinforcement for the technology skill. Or for the independent skill. Technology is often used with our students, which is important for those students and for everyone else. So so for example, all of us use technology. I'm trying to keep track of my time with technology. So that is the independence feature, and it in the 30 schools that we worked in, it was one of the features that was taken up or is used the most often. One of the features of the program. Another feature of the program that was used most often is the peer and social component. And again, we have students with a range of abilities that would necessitate or a range of challenges that would necessitate different types of programs that could be used. So we had one set of programs that we call peer-mediated programs. And those programs were used for students with intellectual disabilities and without intellectual disabilities. There would always be a facility. So the two types of peer-mediated programs are called peer supports, which are designed to establish social relationships. And I'll talk about that. And then peer networks that are designed to that are also designed to focus on social relationships, but in a more advanced way. There's always a facilitator, so these are peer-mediated, but there is always a teacher or a paraprofessional assistant teacher who works with them. And they involve classmates from the school. The peer-mediated and peer supports. There's a classmate that will assist a peer in doing a skill that student with autism needs to learn. So that classmate that may provide assistance during a work-based learning time or PE time. In peer support and peer networks, there are special groups that happen maybe during what we call extracurricular activity, or in the U.S. there are activities or groups that happen at a certain period of the day where students have a choice of being in a technology club or a cybersecurity club or a gaming club. And our students with autism have a choice of choosing from those clubs, and then peers are recruited to participate with them in those activities. So that's one type of social support or social intervention that we do in the school. For students who have close to average intellectual ability but who are experiencing social problems, we take a more directed social skills training approach with the social competence intervention. This intervention happens across a semester. There are about 25 lessons that are done twice a week, and it's a small group-based intervention. So there might be 5 or 6 students with autism, and during that class, they learn about reading the emotions of other people. They learn about self-control or self-regulation. They learn about how to be socially appropriate in a group setting. So there are a range of skills that are directly taught along with homework assignments or assignments that they would do out in the school. So that social competence intervention was developed by Janine Steechter and has a solid basis of support for its effectiveness. The last feature of our program is called transitioning. Is based on transition. So in that. And that feature has 2 different components. One is a component that focuses specifically on work. So one of the things that we know is that work, that the best predictor of work after high school is being involved in a job during high school. So we have a work-based learning experience. We do community and school mapping, and develop transition plans and involve the student in designing their own IEP. There's also a second feature called Transitioning Together that is for parents to prepare them for helping their student transition out of high school. I think I'm going to move quickly through this. The focus for us is to try to involve the student in the decision making about what the program is going to be like, and then to involve them in work as much as possible. So those features make up our CISA program. At one of the schools, we worked with the school. Actually, the school initiated this to make a video which I'm going to show that talks a little bit about the CISA program in that school.
interventions have had a great impact on the culture and staff here at Middle Creek, as well as the students. Overall, it has been great for our staff, and there's just a much better understanding and just support system here at Middle Creek for students with autism. The interventions that we have been lucky enough to provide our students here at Middle Creek have been awesome. The peer networks alone have just been such an amazing intervention. This semester we have 18 different groups running with different staff members running the groups and tons of peers being excited about being in the groups. Supports in the regular ed classrooms have given teachers training on how to set up peer supports and provide them to all students, but have also been great in helping our students be more successful in their academic classes.
During class when we're playing games, I usually try to go over and initiate conversation, ask him about his day. I usually encourage him and tell him he's doing a good job. I see him get so involved with his hand signs. He writes in his solfege and his music. He really gets into it. And I think at the beginning of the year he was kind of timid and he didn't really know what to do, but I've seen him totally grow in his knowledge and his love for the class. It's so much fun.
We had solo auditions for a song from The Lion King, a song that has a lot of Swahili words, and so you're saying things like zingela and we baba and lots of different consonants and words that we don't use in the English language. And so I got to the end and I said, does anybody else want to audition? And Nick just shot his hand straight up in the air. And at first I wasn't sure, okay, what is this? Does he really want to audition, or what does this mean? And I said, okay, Nick, why don't you come up and audition? So he stood in front of the whole class, and I asked if anybody else wanted to audition with him, just not knowing what his comfort level was. Mm-hmm. And so somebody volunteered, and they came up and they sang it with him. He had the music in his hand, and he turned the paper in time, he knew exactly where he was. He used all of the syllables. He had everything in the right rhythm, and it wasn't something as simple as ta, 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 ta. It was really intricate rhythms. And so they went through the whole solo, and it was so cool because it was really good. And the whole class cheered for him, and whenever they cheer for him, he always takes his bows, and you can tell he gets really excited.
So in conclusion, I encourage you to go to our website because there are a number of things that you can pull off, including if you're a special education teacher and you want to introduce your school to autism spectrum disorders, we have a program that you could give in a faculty meeting that is short. It's short but very informative. Anyway, and just these are examples of our website. We're in schools. Have been in schools that are located next to the Mexican border and all the way up to the shores of Lake Superior in Minnesota or in Wisconsin, and have seen the various ways that schools can implement and can create very meaningful, effective programs for students with autism. So, but it has to be intentional. It has to include professional development and ongoing coaching, at least for the first part. So, thank you very much for your attention today.